Hello, welcome new camera trappers and returning camera trappers to our third live webinar. My name is Dr. Stephanie Shuttler.
And I'm Ariel Parsons.
And remember, this is a live webinar, so we're here to go over some reminders and answer your questions. If you have any questions, write them in the comment section below the Facebook live feed. We have 86 camera photo uploads to date now. Yeah, this is really great. We're really excited about this, and thank you so much for your help in this project. This week, instead of doing a top 5 photos, we have a photo sequence. It's something really interesting that happened.
I haven't seen this one, actually, so I'm really excited.
We got this from one of our middle schools that are participating, and they actually found the camera trap on the ground. So when they went to go check the camera, they saw it laying on the ground, and they didn't know how they got there, and they started hypothesizing what happened to the camera trap. But of course, they didn't know until they checked the photos. And when they checked the photos, this is what they found. They got a coyote, so we'll get to the beginning of the sequence. A coyote went in front of the camera and pulled the camera trap off.
Oh, wow.
Now, this camera actually had a problem with its lock, so the coyote didn't have to rip it off the tree. It was loosened already. But we never had this before. We never had a coyote attack the camera trap.
I've never seen that.
It's always been bears are our most notorious suspects.
A lot of times, coyotes actually seem really afraid of the camera.
Yeah.
Like they kind of are wary of it and they'll run away. I've never seen that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so this is some really cool footage that we made into a short video for you to watch of a coyote taking on the camera trap. Okay, now we're going to transition into some reminders. This week you're going to be picking up your camera trap again and deploying it again. With that, if you're a little bit late on your schedule, so if you're new and if you haven't started your deployment on time, we just ask that you stick to the schedule. So it's okay if your deployment's a little bit shorter. And then remember, with each of these camera trap pickups, you're going to get your Kodak moment. So you want to stand in front of the camera trap and have it take your picture for both the take up and the set down. When you're doing your new camera trap, you have to move it to a new location, and you can only run your camera trap once in your own backyard. So if it's in your backyard now, it needs to be completely new. Don't forget to fill out that site description form. And this you'll find on the Candid Critters website, along with other great resources. And when you check your camera traps, make sure to upload those photos to us right away. Usually we don't have a problem with this. People are so excited to look at their photos, and we're excited to see them too. And remember, don't delete any images. We want everything that's in your camera trap folder. Finally, we really want to see your images, your best of images. So you can select them from your folder, from the memory card, and save them to your computer, and then share them on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and use the hashtag CandidCritters. And then we'll find your photos and retweet them or share them on social media and show everyone. And we're just really excited to see the cool animals that you find across the state. Now we're going to transition into learning about a really cool feature of our website. Ariel is going to tell us about how to use this interactive map so that if you want to choose a location that's not of your own choosing on public lands, that you can do that and set up a camera trap there.
Right, yeah, so this is basically at Candid Critters, we're really interested in having cameras set up on public lands. So we've partnered with a number of different agencies around the state. There's state agencies like state parks, Wildlife Resources Commission, as well as national forests and national parks and others, so that we've been able to obtain permits to have our volunteers actually run cameras on these lands. And so if you choose to run cameras on these public lands, it is important that you carry the appropriate permit with you. And so we've put all of those onto the website, and you can download them and just carry it around in case anyone has any questions about exactly what you're doing setting up a camera on public lands. So we've worked with these managers to select appropriate points in these public lands that are relatively feasible anyway to access for volunteers, but also can help answer our own scientific questions as well as any management questions that they have. And so we've put those points that have been selected and approved up on this online map. And so I'm going to show you how to access that map, but also some of the functionality of it that will help you select the right point for you in your own kind of comfort level of physical ability and time commitment. So to do that, we'll start at the Candid Critters website, and we'll go to Volunteer Resources. And then we'll choose the second link, which is to the site selection map. And it'll take a minute to load. It's loading using arcgis.com, but you shouldn't need to sign in or anything. It'll just kind of take its time, and there it is. It'll pop up. And you'll see, of course, all these little purple dots here down in the east of North Carolina. And so we can go ahead and zoom in, and we can also click and drag to center the state so we don't have to look at the entire nation. There we go. And so you can see, of course, all of these dots are the pre-proposed sites that you could claim as a volunteer. And they're all in the east because that's what we're sampling right now. But starting in March, you'll start to see these purple dots creep across the state, and they'll go statewide in a pretty impressive numbers, I think, pretty quickly. So if you're using this map to choose a site, most likely you're going to want to choose a site that's near to where you live. And so the first thing I would do is type in your street address here. So I'm going to type in a randomly chosen street address. This is not my house. It might be your house. I don't know. I apologize if it is. And when we press enter, it's going to think for a minute, and then it's going to zoom in. This is just like Google Maps if you're used to using Google Maps. So there it is. It's zoomed in to the address that I put in there. And now I can zoom out until I start to see, and there they are, until I start to see the purple dots. So these are the closest proposed sites on public lands. Now, it is important to mention that we are constantly updating these sites. So you can see over on the side here that I've got a number of layers that say added on November 7th, added on December 1st. So we're constantly adding new ones, and then we're removing ones that have been claimed by volunteers. So if you don't see something near your home, or at kind of in a place that you're interested in sampling, you can keep checking back, and you might start to see them. You can also email us and say, gee, there's this park, this public land, but I don't see any points on it. Is there a reason for that? And we might be able to, we just might not know about it, for example. And so we could work with you on that. So if I come down here, you see this orange shaded area. This is that particular protected area. And if I want to know what area it is, I can click on the orange part and see that its name is the Wildlife Resources Commission, White Oak River Impoundment Game Land. A little bit of a mouthful for that one. And if I'm searching for a site that I want to claim, maybe I don't really feel like hiking very far or driving very far. So I might choose, for example, this one down here that's pretty accessible on the roadway. If I click it, it shows the deployment name, another mouthful, White Oak River Impoundment Game Land, Open 29. And you'll notice that sometimes these are so long that they kind of go off the edge, and you have to drag it over to get the entire name. One thing to point out here, this is denoted as an open deployment. We have three habitat types that we're interested in for the project: open, forest, and trail. And so if something says open, that means that if you get out to the site and you have a choice to put it pointing towards an open area or a forested area, that you should choose the open area. Sometimes, though, you'll get out to a site that is listed as open, and it will actually be forested. And that's because some of these satellite images that we work from are several years old, and trees and shrubs might have had a chance to grow up. So if that happens, that's fine. You can still set your camera there, but put a comment when you upload your photos that says, this was supposed to be an open site, but it's forested, and that's fine. Another thing to note about this box here is the scarily highlighted yellow part down here. Important notes about this location. This one says none. But for others, there might be some important notes that you'll need to to pay attention to. For example, sometimes land managers will require that you email them at least 3 days before you plan to go out, so that they know where you plan to set the camera. And the reason for this is sometimes they're doing management, like prescribed burns, and they can't really anticipate exactly when it's going to happen more than, say, a couple days ahead of time. And so they just want you to check and make sure that you're not going to put your camera in an area that might be about to be burned, which of course would be bad for the camera. And so do pay attention to those notes whenever you see them and make sure that you follow them. So if I want to go ahead and claim this site, I click this link here. It's going to open up a new tab with a short form. The first part is the deployment name. So I go back to the map, and this is important. Make sure that you highlight the entire name, and then you can right-click and copy it. I prefer this to having you transcribe it, because if you just type it, you could make an error. And since, as you know from your training, all of our deployments have unique deployment IDs, and that's how we reference them throughout the eMAML system, it's important that we get that right. So I highly advocate copy and paste directly from the map, so there will be no chance of a mistake there. And then you'll put your first name, your last name, your email address, and then you'll submit it. And that is how you will claim your site, and then we will go in and remove that site from the map so that no other volunteers can claim it. Okay, so we'll go back to the map. So I might be in the mood for a little adventure and a little hike. I might, I might not. But let's, for argument's sake, say that I am. In this case, I might go for a slightly further site here. So maybe this one way out here, White Oak River Impoundment Forest 38. So I can see that there is a trail that goes through this game land here. And I just want to point out that some sites, so I'm going to this adjacent site here just to show you, this is Croatan National Forest. And you can see these light orange lines are trails and roads that we put in there as a separate kind of layer. But we didn't have that for these game lands. And that's where the satellite imagery can be useful to show you where those trails are. Because if I change my base map, I can go up here to base map. I can change to the streets, and those trails are no longer there. So that's where these different base map layers can actually be quite handy, and I'll show you another one in just a minute. If you zoom in to this streets base map layer, you can also see the names of the roads. So I would, drive down Belgrade Swansboro Road until I got to Butler Road. And then if I want to go to this further site, this one where I'm craving adventure, I could drive along Butler Road, and it ends right here. So I'm going to drag this over. So I would want to know, how far is this hike from the end of Butler Road out to this point that I've decided that I want to take. I'm going to switch the base map back to the imagery so that I can see these trails, because hiking along a trail is going to be faster and easier than hiking straight through a forest. So I'm going to measure, using this measure tool, the distance, using the second option here. The distance in miles from the end of Butler Road down here through the trail system, and I want to I'm clicking along the way to change the trajectory to match this trail as much as possible so I get an accurate measure. And that's about just over a half a mile of trail. It's not too bad. And then I'm going to drag this over a little bit more. From there, let's say that I go in a straight line, which I may or may not actually do through the forest. That would be about 1.25 miles of walking, about half of it on a trail and half of it off a trail. So round trip, I'm looking at 2.5 miles of hiking. And so by measuring this, you can make a decision based on your own, the amount of time that you have available and your own level of physical fitness, whether or not that is an appropriate point for you to try and set your camera at. It is important to note that it is hard to tell from these satellite images how thick a forest might be. And so you may get out and start walking to this point once you get off the trail and realize that that forest is very thick and you just can't really reasonably make it all the way out there. And that's fine. You can stop, you know, let's say you stopped here. You could stop and find a place to set your camera there instead of going all the way out there. In the end, we really don't want you to risk life and limb and dehydration to get out to a site that may be more difficult than we could really tell from these satellite maps. So do keep that in mind. But these tools on this map can really help you make informed decisions about what sites will be most appropriate for you to do. One other last thing I want to show you about this map is another base map that is topographic. This is not quite as important for the eastern counties because most of the coastal plain is really quite flat. But for the future, if you're going out to the mountains, you'll want to use these topographic maps because it'll give you even more information. Excuse the flickering here. It'll give you even more information on how long and how arduous that particular hike might be. And so I'm just zooming out to quickly give you an idea of how these topographic maps work for those of you who are not familiar with them. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of zoom in to about Pisgah. So here we are in the mountains, and you can see it may be too light, but I hope that you can see all of these lines that are relatively close together. The closer together those topographic lines are, the steeper the grade is going to be. So again, keep that in mind when you're thinking about distances that you want to hike. Of course, distances up a steep grade are a lot more difficult and a lot more slow going. All right, and I think that that is everything I had to say about the online site map. But this is, there are bound to be lots of questions on this, and so if you think of any questions that you have for us, right now, please do write in, and we will get to those at the end of our webinar. And if you think of other questions down the line or encounter problems using the map, then please do email us or put a note on the Facebook page, and we'll answer that right away. But we hope that the online map will be a great tool for you to use for this project. And now Stephanie is going to talk about some exciting research that have already come out of these camera trap studies, specifically having to do with white-tailed deer vigilance.
Yes, this is a study that just came out last month, and Ariel and I are both authors on it. And this is about deer vigilance, which is a behavior of animals. So when we think about camera traps, a lot of times we think about counting animals because we can compare the photos in one area to another and say there's more raccoons over here than there are over there. But if you look at the photos carefully, you can also get some behavioral information from them. So if we look at deer and contrast these two photos, we have a deer with its head up and a deer with its head down. Now, deer don't really want to be going through the forest with their head up too much. They mostly want to be eating because in order for deer to be happy, they want to eat a lot and get fat, just like me. Those are my life goals too. But if you live in a forest with a lot of predators or a lot of threat, then you're going to have to be vigilant and scan the environment a lot. And think about this as a human. If you were walking through a savanna in Africa and there were lions all around you or cheetahs or leopards, you'd be really vigilant. You'd be scanning that environment, looking constantly to see where those predators are. So deer react the same way. And we can actually count the number of deer heads in picture sequences. So here's an example of a deer going through a forest, and it stops, it notices something or hears something, and it puts its head up, real vigilant, and looks, and then you'll see a dog comes afterward. So we actually go through all these photos and count the number of times a deer has its head up or down. And if a deer is in an area where there's a lot of threat, a lot of predators, then they're going to be walking through that forest with its head up really quite often. And so this is what we were looking at with our latest study. And the idea is that in the eastern coast, we've lost some of these predators that deer react to. And these are called apex predators. And the eastern coast, these are animals like mountain lions and gray wolves, and they would hunt deer. And deer obviously wouldn't want to get hunted and would be scared of them and be really vigilant around them. But now we don't have these animals anymore. But we do have some different ones. We have human hunters, which kill a lot of deer. And we have coyotes, which may or may not kill deer. They do kill fawns, we know that for sure, but it's really difficult to see if coyotes are killing adult deer. Because even if we find adult or deer meat in their scat, we don't know if they actually actively killed that animal or got an animal that was hunted or hit by a car. And so what we wanted to see is if deer were reacting to these new predators. And then just to confuse things a little bit more, there's also humans that go through the forest, and quite frequently, that don't hunt. So can deer tell the difference between these human hunters and hikers as well? And this really shows the power of citizen science, this project. So if we look on the map, we surveyed deer across 33 parks in 6 states in the eastern United States. At the time of this study, there were about half a dozen people on the eMammal project. So for those scientists to set up the camera traps, it would have taken them years and years. But working with citizen scientists in all these different states, and by having them set camera traps up and upload the photos and identify the species, we were able to collect these data over a much shorter period of time. And this is the largest study to have been done on deer vigilance. Past studies have shown that deer do increase vigilance in relation to hunting, but this always happens at just one or a few sites. And we don't really know how they react to coyotes that well, because coyotes are a new species in the eastern United States. They've only been here for about a few decades. So what did we find? Well, let's break down this graph first. So we have coyotes on the x-axis, and as you go to your right, those are, that increases coyote detection. So there'll be higher numbers of coyote detections towards the right. And on the y-axis is the proportion of time deer spent vigilant. So looking at those photo sequences, how many heads-up photos did they have? And if we expect deer to be more vigilant with coyotes, we would expect that line to increase. But when we plot the data, we see only a very, very slight increase. And essentially, this is no effect. And the dots, the individual data points, they're all over the place. So what we conclude here is that deer in areas of low numbers of coyote detections and high numbers of coyote detections are pretty much the same. So it doesn't seem that deer are increasing their vigilance with relation to coyotes. We also had really surprising results with human hunters. Like I said, in past studies, deer increase their vigilance with human hunters either at the onset of hunting season or in hunted areas compared to unhunted sites. But when we looked across all of these sites, we actually found lower vigilance in the hunted parks. So this was really surprising because, again, these deer, the hunters are shooting deer and killing deer, so you'd expect their vigilance to be higher. In relation to human hikers, when the number of human hikers increased in parks, deer vigilance also went down. And this does make sense because as human hunters are walking through the park and there's a lot more people, deer get used to this and realize that these people are not a threat, and therefore they don't need to spend so much time with their head up, and they can forage more frequently, and they don't have to worry about these human hikers being a threat. So right now, it seems like the East Coast is still lacking its apex predators. Like I said, human hunters, they do kill a large number of deer, but apex predators do more than just kill animals. They exert these behavioral effects. So they either increase vigilance in their prey species, or their prey avoid areas where those predators are present. They might avoid high-risk areas. And when you think about deer, this also has implications on the environment. So deer that are not afraid, they're going to forage those areas a lot more heavily. With the restoration of these more traditional apex predators like gray wolves and cougars, we might not have the problems in the forest like we have in some of the eastern United States, where a lot of the vegetation has really decreased a lot. So by including these apex predators, we can see some of these effects trickle down into the prey species. And we do have a blog post up on the recreational effects on wildlife project page on eMammal, and that leads to the original study. So if you want to read that and get some more information about this study, that would be great, but it would not be possible with volunteers like yourselves. So we're expecting even better and bigger, more wide-scale studies with Candid critters. And I think we have some questions, is that right?
We do. We have one question from Mary. Asking if she needs to, if people need to tag every blank picture that they get. And the answer to that question is unfortunately yes. And so remember that you're just tagging the sequence. So if you have a sequence and you've looked through it carefully and you see that it's blank, that there are no animals in it, then you would call that sequence one no animal. And that can be particularly tough if you have an area with a lot of blowing grass. You might actually have thousands of these, well, hundreds of these sequences that make thousands of pictures. If that's the case, then I suggest that you email your volunteer coordinator, Lexi Mash, and just kind of give her an idea of how many blank sequences you have, because she might be able to help you with dealing with that. One thing for the future, it's not here yet, but in the future we're working on a program that will actually kind of scrub those out automatically. Mm-hmm. And we've made a lot of progress with it. We're working with some engineers at University of Missouri. They've made a lot of progress with it, but it's just not quite ready to use yet. But hopefully in the next year, fingers crossed, we can get that out to volunteers, and that will greatly reduce the amount of time that you're spending tagging these blank sequences.
Yeah. Thank you. And looks like we have no more questions, so we're going to conclude this webinar. Thank you once again for joining us, and we're going to be on break for a little bit. We're going to start the webinars up again in March with our new camera trapping season, and then we'll also have the rest of our state join us. So we'll open up Candid Critters to Central and Western North Carolina.
And we'll have all the results from now until March, so hopefully we'll have a lot to share with you then. Lots of pictures.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.